Indy?
Did you know that it was state-of-the-art technology that brought Harrison Ford back into the Indiana Jones franchise? We'll explore this and 14 other amazing facts about the Dial of Destiny, and at the end we'll reveal where one of the movie's most important scenes was really shot. But first, Fact 1. Tech that made Ford 40 years younger convinced him to bring back Indy. Thanks to several tools including machine learning, CGI and other tech, 80-year-old Harrison could travel through time and spend around 25 minutes of the film looking like the Indy of the early 1980s. Visual effects studio Industrial Light and Magic used a set of tools called Face Swap, using 2 infrared cameras perched on either side of the one filming Ford to get information from his performance. The team then used machine learning tools to trawl through years of footage that Lucasfilm had in its archives. All of that info was then combined to create a CG mask that could be placed on Indy in every frame. Once Ford saw the tech and the fact he could be taken back to his former glory in only 2 days, he agreed to be in the movie. The technology was the same that let Martin Scorsese de-age actors for The Irishman, but for this film, they also used what Ford called dots on my face to capture even more data. Clearly he was happy to see a younger version of himself, and this wasn't just from the de-aging tech. Fact 2. Ford's stunt double was capable of defrauding the star. 56-year-old Mike Massa might be a quarter of a century younger than his Hollywood counterpart, but Ford's stunt double had his work cut out on this movie. We'll talk about why in a later fact, but this one is all about how much the double looked like his counterpart. Massa has lived an interesting life as a university researcher, a tech entrepreneur, an investment banker, and a US Navy officer, but he could have lived out his life as Harrison Ford, at least on his phone anyway. He looks so much like the star that when on set, the double was able to unlock Ford's phone using Face ID. How's that for a convincing likeness? Massa more recently has been making his own headlines when he set himself on fire during the Screen Actors Guild protests. Or was it Harrison Ford? Who knows? Fact 3. The subway chase has links to James Bond. Even though the subway chase in the movie features Indy escaping on horseback towards a New York subway station, the sequence was actually filmed thousands of miles away from the Big Apple. An accurate subway replica was built just for the movie at UK's Pinewood Studios 007 stage. The location is something of a legend in the movie-making world, as it's previously served as a shooting site for many James Bond, Harry Potter and Star Wars movies. Behind-the-scenes filmmaker Ian Bucknote also revealed that the Archimedes tomb, along with its caverns, was also located just outside London, with that set dominating around 80% of the Bond stage. He was shocked to be able to turn around and suddenly be transported to the New York subway. Someone should have reminded him he was on a movie set. Fact 4. The director used a violent suggestion by Ford. If Harrison Ford wants to do something on set, it's probably best to let him do it. After all, it'd be a different movie if he wasn't in it. So when it came to the moment when Indy encounters Mads Mikkelsen's Dr. Voller, Ford decided he wanted a more innovative way of injuring him than just simply a swift meeting of fist and face. His smile before then landing a haymaker past his iconic hat was all Ford's idea. Even though it feels like it should be a trademark Jones move, he'd never done it before in a movie. Not everything went to plan during rehearsals for this quirky move. Find out what went wrong in another fact later in the video. But for now, let's look at how one of the thrilling chases in the movie left one of the filming locations look like a scrap heap. Fact 5. The set was a Tuk Tuk graveyard. Co-writers and brothers Jez and John Henry Butterworth said that the Tuk Tuk chase was included, as well as other scenarios, to keep the action fast-paced, but also so that the audience could see how Indy gets out of more and more sticky situations. He certainly does that with this chase. The production team used 12 Tuk Tuks that were all designed for different scenarios. The sequence was filmed over several weeks and featured a whole tomb's worth of techniques for putting it all together. A signature stunt during this part of the movie is Indy leaping from Tuk Tuk to Tuk Tuk during the street chase in Tangier. Visual effects supervisor Andrew Whitehurst has revealed that the stunt was actually shot on location in Morocco. They had a stunt performer jump between vehicles, and then the visual effects team did a CG takeover of the Tuk Tuk that he leapt from, with a CG van colliding into it. More on that later. This stunt might have been on location, but the Apollo 11 parade seemingly in Manhattan definitely wasn't. At the end, we'll take a look at where it was actually shot. Fact 6. The stunt team used home movies to help with big stunts. Before a fight scene like the one seen in the Moroccan casino, the stunt team needed to map out what was going to happen so the choreography wouldn't be ruined on a real take. To do this, the film decided to film a crude, shorter version so that director James Mangold and everyone on set could get an idea of what would be needed on the day of shooting. The stunt team kept the cardboard box industry in business with their set building, but they also took the whole process very seriously by adding After Effects and sound effects to make the whole thing as close to the final product as possible. Once this was done, it was presented to the director and refined before the likes of Ford & Co. did it for real. Well, as real as you can get in a movie. That being said, there were some real dangers faced on set, especially for the octogenarian Ford. Fact 7. Ford suffered a debilitating injury on set. When he was rehearsing his movement for that hat punch we mentioned earlier, so director James Mangold and his cinematographer knew what he was going for, the actor tore his subcapularis off the rotator in his shoulder. This needed surgery, and Ford was out of commission for a month before he could get back in front of the camera again. This meant the Human Torch himself, Mike Massa, needed to step in and do more scenes than were planned. Even though he could pass himself off as Ford on his phone, he needed to make sure his back was to the camera as much as possible to make sure audiences couldn't spot the substitution. Ford is no stranger to injuries on set. In 2015, he suffered a serious leg injury on The Force Awakens, but despite his visits to the hospital, he's shown no signs of stopping anytime soon. Fact 8. The spear is an Easter egg. The Spear of Destiny seen in the opening flashback scene is a nice little Easter egg referencing a piece of Indiana Jones lore. It's a real artifact known as the Lance of Longinus, thought to have been responsible as the blade that drew Christ's blood. This artifact was previously seen in a 1995 comic book, Indiana Jones and the Spear of Destiny, a 4-issue comic released by Dark Horse in 1995. It features Indy and his father as they must stop the blade falling into the wrong hands. And another very common Easter egg from the past makes several more appearances throughout the movie. Fact 9. A Hollywood icon makes a few cameos. The Wilhelm Scream is an iconic sound effect in movies. If you didn't know, it sounds like this. This scream is used throughout cinema history, like an in-joke for presumably bored editors. The scream is featured in every single Indiana Jones movie, and like a lot of other Easter eggs in the Dial of Destiny, it returns in the franchise once again. It features either 6 or 7 times depending on who's counting, and the most prominent use of the effect is during the train sequence we mentioned in the last fact, which features at the beginning of the movie. As a younger man, Indy reaches the train holding his pal and the lance when he pulls a baddie off onto the tracks and elicits that famous screech. That character might have been screaming, but Phoebe Waller-Bridge definitely wasn't. Fact 10. Phoebe Waller-Bridge constantly disrupted filming with her smile. We've already looked at the many challenges that came with filming this movie, but for the actress that played Helena, there was a very unorthodox one. Phoebe Waller-Bridge has mentioned that one of the biggest challenges she had was to stop smiling while filming on set, as a character was meant to be in fear rather than enjoying life. The problem was she was having such a good time playing her role opposite Harrison Ford that she couldn't help it. The grin was so frequent that the director had to tell her to stop smiling, as it was disrupting filming so often. In response to this, Waller-Bridge could only say, "But he's wearing the hat." She wasn't the only member of the cast that was so delighted to see a childhood hero brought to life. Antonio Banderas, who plays Ronaldo in the movie, says that he still gets chills just thinking about being in an Indiana Jones film. Fact 11. An Oscar-winning team helped bring the movie to life. We've already talked about the magic that visual effects experts needed to pull off to take the years off Ford, but that was just the start of an epic amount of work this team did on Dial of Destiny. Although the movie features a huge amount of impressive practical effects, there's also 2,350 VFX shots used in the film. We've already mentioned the Tuk Tuk chase, which needed some visuals stitched into the sequence as the production team wasn't able to get all the shots they wanted in Morocco. The underwater dive sequence in the Mediterranean was also given the CG cherry on the top treatment, but one of the biggest jobs for the visual designers was unsurprisingly the recreation of ancient Syracuse, accurate to 213 to 214 BC. They had to make sure every single detail was historically accurate, down to props sitting on wagons. Then they needed to build the various boats and buildings that got destroyed during the climax of the movie. No wonder the team had previously won Oscars for Raiders of the Lost Ark and Temple of Doom. But let's not forget about the stuff that was shot for real. Fact 12. A practical effect was used to preserve movie history. One of the tropes seen throughout the Indiana Jones movies is the Paramount logo morphing into a mountain to start off each epic adventure. In the Dial of Destiny, this couldn't be done, so instead, the logo match was done with Lucasfilm, as this logo transitions into a lock seen on the train carriage Jones is locked inside. We're guessing this was chosen as it was a lot easier to match than the Disney castle to anything seen in the opening sequence. The process to do the logo match was done practically, in camera, to match with the director's ethos to try and do as much of the movie as possible without computer intervention. It's an effect that starts the movie as it means to go on, and in true Indiana Jones style, you couldn't start a movie like this without some treasure. Fact 13. The train is filmed with real relics. Back in the Second World War, the villains of the piece were known for their real collections of priceless artifacts. So much so, there were so many, a majority of them were never recovered. The team behind Dial of Destiny did their research to such a degree that they filled the train with real relics of the time that never found their way back to their owners. With so many stolen relics during the war and the ability to change the clock back for Ford, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Lucasfilm could make these movies forever. But according to one of the most important men behind the movies, this is not going to be the case. Fact 14. Spielberg has made it clear what's next next for the franchise. After directing the first 4 Indiana Jones movies, the iconic director decided to take a back seat on this one and bring in James Mangold, but in interviews he's been very forthcoming with his views on what the future holds for the franchise. No future at all. He's categorically said that there will be no more Indiana Jones movies, which means you should expect to see Indiana Jones 6 in a few years' time. And our last fact is another that teaches us all the lesson that when it comes to movies, we shouldn't believe everything we see on screen. Fact 15. The Apollo 11 parade was filmed far from Manhattan. For the surreal scene when Indy crashes a key moment of history during the Apollo 11 victory parade, you could be forgiven for thinking that the whole thing was shot on location in Manhattan. Then again, stopping New York for a parade is probably more expensive than even Spielberg could afford. So instead, Mangold took the team to Glasgow, Scotland, which had a selection of streets that, with a few banners here and ticker tape there, could pass for the city that never sleeps. American flags were hung out of windows, barricades were set up, and storefronts were given a makeover to fit 1969 America at the height of space fever. The challenge of filming that scene was just how huge the scale was, especially with limited time they had to close down a busy Glasgow street. Once the big details were done, the art team went in depth to stay faithful to the time. Every single protest sign, advertisement, and everything else had to be handcrafted and purposefully doctored to make the world feel lived in. All the hard work paid off and the scene was set ready for Harrison Ford to ride his horse for real through the city of Glasgow. I mean, New York.